Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. This is a really good turnout and we appreciate it. So this is the 2024 annual Frances Ivens Lecture. The lecture is named in honor of Mary Hannah Frances Ivens, and she was an obstetrician, a gynecologist, and the first woman appointed to a hospital consultant post here in Liverpool. There are multiple sponsors of this event. The event is co-hosted by the Centre for Health, Arts, Society and the Environment. Also the Centre for the Study of International Slavery, the Department of History and the Department of Public Health, Policy and Systems. This is also the inaugural event of a new interdisciplinary network for the study of race and critical health humanities. And if anybody's interested in finding out more about that network and would like to sign up and be on the email list for it, there is a sign-up sheet at the desk outside. What I should just briefly mention by way of housekeeping is that if there is a fire alarm, we'll assume it's a real one, and you should make your way out of one of these two exits, and that will lead you onto the stairwell, which you would have come in by. Okay, so it is my great pleasure, honour and privilege to welcome Professor Vanessa Northington Gamble, MD, PhD, to deliver this year's Frances Ivens Lecture. Dr. Gamble is a university professor of medical humanities at George Washington University. She is the first woman and first African-American to hold this prestigious position. She is also a professor of health policy and medicine at George Washington University. In addition, she's adjunct professor of nursing at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Dr. Gamble has frequently been a pioneer during her professional career. She was the first African-American woman appointed and later tenured to the faculty of the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine. In 1996, she became the founding director of the University of Wisconsin's Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in Medicine, one of the first academic centers to address racial and ethnic inequities in health and healthcare. So Dr. Gamble is then clearly an internationally recognized expert on the history of American medicine, racial and ethnic disparities in health and healthcare, public health ethics and bioethics. And throughout her career, she has worked to promote equity and justice in American medicine and health. She is the author of several widely acclaimed publications on the history of race and racism in American medicine and bioethics, including the monograph, Making a Place for Ourselves, the Black Hospital Movement, 1920 to 1945, published by Oxford University Press in 1995, and enduringly relevant and impactful articles that I've been using since I started teaching here, including Under the Shadow of Tuskegee, African Americans and Healthcare, published in the American Journal of Public Health, and also African Americans, Public Health and the 1980 influenza epidemic in the same journal. Public service has been a hallmark of Dr. Gamble's career. She chaired the committee that took the lead role in the successful campaign to obtain the 1997 apology from President Clinton for the infamous United States Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee. Dr. Gamble has also served on several boards, including Hampshire College, the Penn Medical Board, the National Advisory Council for Human Genome Research, and the National Council on the Humanities. Among Dr. Gamble's many notable media appearances, highlights include her role in the excellent documentary on the Tuskegee experiment, The Deadly Deception, 1993, and the US National Public Radio broadcast Remembering Anarcha, Lucy and Betsy, the mothers of modern gynecology in 2016. These contributions have not only had a profound influence on public history, but also academic research across multiple disciplines, and creative interpretations and memorializations of African American health and medical history, including poetry, visual art, and sculpture. Her many honors include election as a Fellow of the Hastings Center, an honorary degree from SUNY Upstate Medical University, the Distinguished Graduate Award from the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. She's a proud native of West Philadelphia, and Dr. Gamble is also an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine, one of the very highest honors in American medicine. This evening, Dr. Gamble will examine the life of Dr. Virginia M. Alexander, an African-American physician activist who crafted a career that combined medicine, research, and activism to become a leading pioneer of racial justice and health equity. The talk will examine her personal and professional biography to illuminate the role of racism in American medicine and the frequently unrecognized history of African-American women's to combat it. Will you please give a warm Liverpool welcome to Dr. Gamble.
Thank you, Stephen. As you were giving that introduction, I was thinking, who is he talking about? Because like, oh, you know, but then the other thing I started thinking, well, I did that 30 years ago, so time goes on. I just want to thank you for inviting me. This is my third visit to Liverpool, and I hope to come back. That has been very warm and welcoming. I even got almost stuck in the crypt today when I came out of the church. Nobody was there, and they said the crypt is closed. And that would have been a nice reason. Like, Stephen, I'm kind of stuck in the crypt, so I can't make it here. So, but I am here, and I'm very happy to be here. The child's loud, agonizing screams pierced the apartment building. His struggling mother had to work, and without child care, she had to leave her son alone. And he somehow burned himself. His cries beckoned the downstairs neighbor, who found the young child writhing in pain. The concerned neighbor swooped him up and rushed him to a clinic near their North Philadelphia home, where he received excellent emergency care. The staff, however, urged that the acutely ill child be taken to the nearby Lankenau Hospital for inpatient treatment. However, despite his condition, the hospital refused to admit him because he was poor and black. In 1934, when this incident occurred, Lankenau restricted the number of black patients by race and ability to pay. Apparently, the quota had been reached. The child and his caregiver suffered additional indignities. The hospital forced them to leave. It would not even allow them to stay until his mother's arrival. When the child returned home, his worried mother summoned Dr. Virginia M. Alexander, who practiced in the neighborhood. She jumped into her car and, navigating narrow streets, raced to the home. She gently soothed the boy, and she too determined that the boy needed immediate inpatient care. She swiftly admitted him to her small hospital, the Esperanto Home Health. The child remained there for 4 weeks and then received another 4 weeks of outpatient care. A year after his treatment, Dr. Alexander had only received $12.50 in payment. Cognizant of the racism then pervasive in Philadelphia's medical institutions, Dr. Alexander lamented, "And so it is with many of the cases I have to treat. Patients go to the clinics and they are told they cannot be cared for 2 weeks. Sometimes the condition is acute when they are turned away." Dr. Alexander was an African-American physician activist whose biography I am currently writing. She lived from 1899 to 1949 and tried to make a difference in the lives of her poor patients and her Black patients and the Black community. One colleague astutely noted that Alexander believed that the health of Black people was worth striving for at a time when many white physicians did not. Alexander crafted a career that combined medicine, public health, and anti-racist activism and religion, and emerged as a leading pioneer of racial justice and health equity. This evening, I will examine how she came to construct this pioneering professional career and its impact. Her biography contributes to our understanding of the history of African American women physicians. Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler was the first African American to receive a medical degree, and she received it in 1864. However, most of the lives of the women who followed in her professional footsteps remain, for the most part, unexamined. But Dr. Alexander's biography goes beyond examining the life of an individual person. It helps illuminate the substance and character of past efforts to eliminate racial health disparities in America and reminds us of their long, stubborn history. In my examination of Dr. Alexander's life, I will not be taking a profiles and courage approach. My goal is not to present her as a two-dimensional, heroic Black woman, but as a complex human being with strengths, triumphs, and accomplishments, but also with failures, frailties, and disappointments. Yes, Dr. Alexander was a pioneer in racial justice, public health, and medicine, but as a friend cautioned her early in her career, "You are a pioneer, and their lot is never easy." Words, I am sure, that also describe the life and work of Dr. Frances Ivens. Before I examine Dr. Alexander's life and career, I want to discuss how I first came to write her biography. I first heard about Virginia Alexander from Dr. Helen O. Dickens, my medical school mentor at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Dickens, whose father had been born enslaved, graduated from the University of Illinois Medical School in 1934, the only Black woman in a class of 175. After graduation, she completed her internship at Chicago's Providence Hospital, the first Black-controlled hospital in the United States. After her training, she moved to Philadelphia in 1935 to practice with Virginia Alexander. 10 years later, Dickens became the first board-certified African-American obstetrician gynecologist in Philadelphia. And in 1950, she became the first African-American woman admitted to the American College of Surgeons. When I was in medical school, Dr. Dickens and I often talked about the history of African-American women physicians. It was she who first told me about Virginia Alexander and urged me to write her history. She thought that it would be a good fit, as both Alexander and I had grown up in poor families in Philadelphia and had interest in the social aspects of medicine and public health. Indeed, my book will be dedicated to Dr. Dickens. However, for many years, I was reluctant to write Dr. Alexander's biography, and in part because I thought and still think that biography is one of the most difficult genres of writing to expertly master. Or perhaps, as a former graduate student once told me, writing about African American women physicians would inevitably involve some self-exploration. My resistance to writing Alexander's biography continued despite additional links in our lives. We both love Philadelphia. We both are graduates of the University of Pennsylvania, she from its undergraduate college, and I from its graduate and medical school. We both lived in Washington, D.C. Her residence was 3 blocks from my former home. We both lived in Alabama, but I was still being stubborn. What finally convinced me to write her biography was that I discovered that our ancestors had both been enslaved in Mecklenburg County, Virginia. Now let's get back to the life and career of Dr. Alexander. Her parents, Hilliard and Virginia Pace, had been born enslaved in Virginia and migrated to Philadelphia in the late 19th century to Ward 7, the area analyzed by Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois and his landmark study in 1899, The Philadelphia Negro. Virginia was born on February 4th, 1899, in a racially diverse working-class neighborhood in South Philadelphia. She had a hard, scrapple childhood. Her mother died when Virginia was 4. The family's finances later precipitously plummeted after her father lost his successful writing academy when she was in her teens. After his wife's death and the loss of his business, Hilliard Alexander found it difficult to raise Virginia and her 4 siblings and sent them to North Philadelphia to live with their aunt and uncle. Virginia had a contentious and emotionally distant relationship with her aunt, but a few blocks away from her new home, she found inspiration and mentorship from Reverend E.W. Moore, the activist minister of Zion Baptist Church, which was one of the city's largest Black congregations. He impressed upon Virginia the importance of being a man for God and the race, and of making one's faith active by confronting racial injustice, a dictum that Virginia would later follow. Virginia graduated from honors from high school in 1917, and both she and her brother Raymond received academic scholarships to the University of Pennsylvania. Their father strongly supported their educational aspirations because he believed that his lack of education had led him to lose his business. However, their aunt and uncle did not share in Hilliard's enthusiasm for his child's education. They wanted the siblings to forego higher education and work to financially contribute to the hospital. Their aunt announced that if they did not heed her wishes, that they were no longer welcome in her home. The siblings desperately wanted to attend college and therefore had to find new homes and employment to support themselves throughout their college careers. Virginia's difficult decision to disrupt her family life proved to be the right choice as she flourished at Penn. A scholastically gifted education major, she received distinguished grades in several subjects. She blazed through Penn and graduated in 3 years, all the while frequently working as many as 20 hours a week in a variety of jobs, including housekeeper, clerk, or a waitress. When Virginia Alexander entered the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in September 1920, only 65 Black women practiced in the United States, 5 of them in Philadelphia. But Virginia found the road to a medical degree very rocky. During her first year of medical school, she failed all her final exams, in part because of feelings of marginalization. At Penn, she had been part of a close circle of smart, professionally ambitious African American students. At Women's Medical College, Virginia was the only Black person in her class and one of two in the entire school. Racial discrimination intensified her feelings of loneliness and adversely affected her grades. As a member of the first-year basketball team, Alexander expected to attend a dance organized by the players. However, faculty members canceled the event when they learned of her plans to attend. The discrimination did not end there. During the spring of her first year, Alexander's classmates held a minstrel show under the auspices of the Young Women's Christian Association to raise funds for Near East relief. The event included students performing in blackface as the Gold Dust Twins. The racist caricatures from a washing powder advertisement. The program was promoted in the school bulletin and received support from faculty and students, suggesting an unwelcoming racial climate for Black students at the school. Despite her academic difficulties, the school allowed her to remain if she repeated her first year. She did, and her academic problems never resurfaced, partly because her isolation evaporated when she gained two Black classmates. Virginia's activism began when she was still a medical student. During her junior year in 1924, she led 3 other Black students in a protest against the racism at Women's Medical. They met with the dean to denounce the behavior of an influential professor who they said enjoyed telling discreditable, dirty, and insulting stories about Black people whenever they were in his class. The professor even went so far as to lecture his Black students for what he alleged were their attempts to get above their people, informing them that despite their accomplishments, that they would always only be Negroes. Virginia and her Black classmates called the meeting with the dean because, as they put it, our self-respect demanded that we register protests. The dean scoffed at their grievance and supported the professor. Although the protest was unsuccessful, it marked a milestone in Alexander's anti-racist activism. By the time that she graduated, Virginia had earned a reputation as a careful, earnest, and diligent student. After 5 years as what she called hard grind, she received her medical degree in June 1925, with 29 other women, including another African American. By graduation, her professional future finally appeared bright. A few months earlier, her career prospects seemed bleak as racism and sexism hampered her search for an internship, which had become increasingly important for professional advancement. Indeed, the completion of one was mandatory for a Pennsylvania medical license. One hospital director told Virginia that she would not be appointed, even if she were first in 1,000 applicants. Even the internship at her medical school was not an option because it did not admit Black women. When Virginia and her classmate Mae McCarroll sought internships at the hospital, a school official acknowledged that the 2 women had been doing good work, are diligent, and should make good interns, and were deserving of the best that their hospitals offer. In other words, their postgraduate training would need to take place at a Black hospital. School officials worked to get them internships at one. Dr. Catherine Berry Richardson, a white Women's Medical College alumna, assisted Alexander and McCarroll in their quest for internships. She has strong ties with African American physicians at the City Hospital, Kansas City, number 2, including its superintendent, Dr. Thomas C. Unthank. The Missouri Hospital had a proud legacy of training Black physicians, but it had never appointed any women. Unthank initially hesitated to consider the 2 students because of their gender, a reflection of the discrimination that Black women physicians frequently experienced from Black male physicians. He eventually relented, and Virginia Alexander and Mae McCarroll became the first women interns at the hospital. And there's Virginia on the left and with Mae McCarroll. After her internship, Virginia remained in Kansas City for another year to do a pediatrics residency at Wheatley Providence, another Black hospital. Brimming with optimism about her professional prospects, Virginia returned to Philadelphia in 1927. She was ready to open her medical practice and begin the work of improving the health of her North Philadelphia neighborhood. She first began by providing outpatient care in her home. In 1930, she renovated her 3-story residence to open the Esperanto Health Home, a 3-bed licensed private hospital used primarily for minor surgeries and deliveries. And here's the external, the opening of Esperanto. She's walking her front door. This is the interior of Esperanto. She considered Esperanto a teaching center for the provision of health education and birth control. 2 years after she had opened the medical facility, the Southern Workman, a journal of Black life, praised her work there as an example of intelligent, practical health work for Negroes. Virginia Alexander viewed her medical practice as inextricably linked to broader social and political concerns. At a time when organized medicine opposed such beliefs, she called her practice a socialized medical practice. To her, that meant it exemplified service to community and that it would grow into a group practice with shared responsibilities. She also saw the Esperanto home as a medical sanctuary from the racism pervasive in Philadelphia's hospitals. Alexander's patients, as I made plain in the story that opened this talk, encountered firsthand the consequences of such discriminatory practices. Alexander's medical career bloomed. Her colleagues, both Black and white, held her in high regard. One white male physician once remarked, if that woman were to call up and say that she had a man in labor, I should say, send him, doctor, for I knew she was right. Alexander maintained a large, but by no means lucrative practice. By 1933, she had treated over 2,000 patients in her home, in her office, or in their homes. Black women flocked to her practice, and she did not need referrals from male physicians. She frequently did not charge patients, and thus her financial situation was often precarious. However, as noted by her friends, Virginia was not a great businesswoman. She had operated the Esperanto Health Home for almost 2 years before she realized that she needed a license. After almost 8 years of work, she declared, I have accumulated nothing in the way of the world's goods. Alexander found herself burdened by the demands of her growing practice. She often worked 16-hour days. At one point, she even suffered a nervous breakdown as the result of overwork. Virginia decided that she needed a partner, and in 1935, she hired my mentor, Helen Dickens. The two women practiced together for 7 years until Dickens left the practice to obtain additional training. At a time when the color line in American medicine was so rigid, Alexander maintained a uniquely interracial practice. Many of her white patients were Quakers. She had initially established ties with members of the Society of Friends while a freshman at Penn, when she wandered into a Quaker meeting house and felt an immediate spiritual connection. Upon returning to Philadelphia after her training in Kansas City, social, political, and spiritual factors led her to a deepening of her Quaker ties. In September 1930, Virginia became the first Black member of the Race Relations Committee of the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting of Friends. Since she was not a friend, she had to join as an unofficial member representing her race. Previously, the committee had excluded African Americans because some members believed they could speak more freely and with greater disinterest as a solely white committee than as a mixed group. Alexander's sincere and abiding friendships with several Quakers led to her pioneering appointment. At her very first meeting, she gave notice that she would use her new position to urge the group to take action against hospital discrimination. Virginia Alexander's work on the Race Relations Committee influenced her decision to formally become a Quaker. In December 1930, 3 months after her appointment to the Race Relations Committee, she applied for membership to the Germantown monthly meeting. As the overseers carefully considered her application, some worried about future complications from having a Black member, including a potential increase in African American worshipers, the admission of Black children into their schools, and the possibility of interracial marriage. Despite these concerns, her application was approved in February 1931, and for many years, she was the only Black Quaker in Philadelphia. Alexander enthusiastically embraced Quakerism. It opened a path for her to combine her successful professional career with a deep commitment to unwavering faith and passionate social activism, especially on matters of racism in medicine. Following the lessons of Reverend Moore, she would be a woman for God and the race by using her new religion to both nourish her soul and improve the health of African Americans. In July 1935, Virginia conducted critical research on race and health under the auspices of the Race Relations Committee. She conceived, co-directed, and obtained funding for an interracial team to investigate the social, economic, and health problems of North Philadelphia, the neighborhood that was so central to her life. Her work on this project was personal, it was professional, and it was political. The study was a clear example of what we would now call action-oriented research, as she planned to translate her research into practical solutions. Alexander wrote most of the project's 132-type final report, The Economic, Social, and Health Problems of North Philadelphia, and their relationship to a proposed interracial public health demonstration project, which was summarized in this article entitled Negro Hospitalization. Writing with articulateness and fire, Alexander used quantitative and qualitative data to illuminate the status of African American patients and physicians in Philadelphia. Alexander's study painted a bleak picture of the health of Black Philadelphians. For example, in 1926, Black infants died almost twice as often as white ones. And unfortunately, that is still the case in many parts of the United States. And in 1927, African Americans died from tuberculosis at about 6 times the rate of white Philadelphians. Alexander attributed these sobering statistics primarily to social and political factors, such as substandard housing, inadequate education, and unremitting poverty. She also pointed to the racism in Philadelphia's hospitals. Alexander graphically documented the role that hospital discrimination played in creating and maintaining health inequities. She discovered that many hospitals excluded Black patients or cared for them in separate wards or clinics. Alexander labeled one hospital outstandingly unfriendly to colored people. She also used the words of Black patients to illuminate the racism they often faced as they sought treatment. One woman recounted her experience seeking medical care for her child. I didn't like St. Luke's and Children's Hospital Clinic, and I wouldn't go there again. The resident called my child a cannibal because she did not stop chewing gum the moment he asked her to stop. Another described her fears of being involuntarily sterilized if she were admitted to one of the city's hospitals. I was told to go to Hahnemann for an operation, but I was afraid to go because they always tell you that you need an operation when you don't, and then you can't have any more babies. In the 1935 report, Alexander also revealed that the city's Black physicians faced steep obstacles. She discussed how they were fortunate enough that if they were fortunate enough to receive admitting privileges at a Philadelphia white hospital, they often encountered hostilities, as she herself knew firsthand. One evening, Virginia went to a dispensary, an outpatient clinic, to inquire about a patient. The woman intern who answered the door assumed that she was a patient and chastised her for coming after hours. Virginia was shocked by the discourteous, reproachful attack that she received from this young physician, who did not know her, as she put it, from any other colored woman. After the hostile encounter, she politely thanked the intern, but before she turned on her heels, she proudly and emphatically announced, "I am Dr. Alexander." Virginia considered her reaction a lesson in race relations because she had demonstrated to the intern that a Black woman could be a physician. Virginia also received a cold reception at other hospitals. She discovered that most of the staff at one hospital, including nurses and elevator operators, were ungracious and seemed unable to rise to the situation of having ordinary civil or professional relations with a colored doctor. There were two Black hospitals in Philadelphia, and Dr. Alexander acknowledged that they could not adequately meet the demands of the Black medical profession. She realized that her career was anomalous for an African-American physician, especially a woman. She was one of only 2 Black physicians with hospital appointments at a white hospital and one of 5 with outpatient clinic appointments. Her connections to the city's white Quaker community significantly helped these appointments. Alexander's research and clinical experience expanded her awareness of a lack of public health facilities and training for African Americans in Philadelphia. And she proposed that there be an interracial public health clinic in Philadelphia. Virginia Alexander believed that fighting health inequities should not be an issue limited to Black people, but that white people should also be involved. The 1935 North Philadelphia study highlighted the exclusion of Black health professionals from the 3 city hospitals, including Philadelphia General Hospital. As a member of the Friends Race Relations Committee, Alexander forcefully brought the problem of hospital discrimination to the predominantly white committee and successfully lobbied it to take action. Between 1937 and 1940, Philadelphia General Hospital appointed 3 Black physicians. One committee member observed that largely because of Virginia's firm but reconciling approach, hospital doors were opened that had been shut. However, Alexander failed in an earlier effort to get Friends Hospital, a Quaker-operated mental institution, to reverse its exclusionary policies and admit one of her patients. Alexander's family would later become a target of racial discrimination from Quakers in Philadelphia. In February 1938, she applied to get her 3-year-old niece and goddaughter, Mary Elizabeth, admitted to the school affiliated with her Quaker meeting. The admissions committee, however, rejected the application because the time had not come for the natural, happy, and helpful admission of Negro students, as they put it, in our school. Members of the committee feared that desegregation of the school would jeopardize the school's financial stability. A previous year, Media Friends School had experienced a large deficit because the admission of Black students had prompted several families to withdraw their children. In an April 1938 meeting that Alexander described as neither easy nor pleasant, the admissions committee revealed its decision. She cried as she heard that the school had rejected her niece solely because of her race. I wept, as one would weep when one began to realize her helplessness in a situation which one had felt was solvable here and now, solvable through courageous, earnest seeking. Committee members hoped that she would persevere with her friendly association and contact, and she did. However, the rejection embraced her with profound grief. 8 days after the meeting, she wrote her funeral wishes on the back of an envelope. She wanted a Quaker-style memorial, but not in a meeting house. In a letter to her sister-in-law describing this painful meeting, Virginia concluded it by asking, how long and why? As I have researched Dr. Alexander's life, I have struggled with the question, why, after the painful incident with her niece, did she remain a Quaker? But I've learned that that is not the right question. A more appropriate question might be what attracted her to Quakerism, especially at a time when most African Americans, including her family members, embraced Black religious culture. I think that the membership in the Society of Friends allowed her to craft her career that linked religious affiliation, public health research, and anti-racist activism. The other thing that I think why she stayed a Quaker is that the Quaker religion's faith spiritually sustained her through her remarkable career. When she went to a meeting house, she could sit and be. No one had to, if she wanted to get up, she could get up. If she didn't want to get up, she didn't have to get up. It's one of the few places where I think that she found sanctuary. And the other thing is that Virginia said that after her niece was rejected, she said, I lost my zest for my meeting, but the substance of my faith is very real to me. Despite the racism in their own ranks, the Quakers sustained two of the few predominantly white committees that attempted to address racial inequities in Philadelphia. And if Virginia were to leave the Quakers, she would lose that platform. And in her work, Virginia frequently bore witness to the humiliation and pain that she suffered as a Black woman physician to influence the attitudes of white people, especially Quakers, and to prompt them into action. Marjorie Penny, her patient and fellow activist, called Alexander her conscience. She observed that although the African American community needed Dr. Alexander more, the white one needed her because her poise and patience and skill constituted reproaches to racism. As Alexander's career advanced, she increasingly focused on the role that social factors played in the health of African Americans. And her interest reflected, in part, the intellectual influence of the prominent sociologist and civil rights activist, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, with whom she had begun an intimate relationship in the early 1930s. It's not clear how long their relationship lasted, but they remained close friends until her death. And Du Bois's biographer, David Levering Lewis, has called his relationship with Virginia one of his deepest and most enduring. Du Bois contended, most notably in the 1906's The Health and Physique of the Negro American, that racial health inequities stemmed primarily from social factors, and not from, as was then widely believed, inherent racial traits. Du Bois's emphasis on the connection between rigorous scholarship and social activism is clearly reflected in Alexander's work. At his urging, she took graduate classes at Penn. However, influenced by her work on the North Philadelphia study, she decided that disciplined study and research in public health was more fitting for her professional ambitions, and applied to the doctoral program at Yale. Initially, she found some resistance from the chair of the Department of Public Health, but she persisted and entered Yale School of Public Health in October 1936, the first African American admitted to the school. But ill health forced her to leave after 1 year. For at least 3 years prior to her matriculation at Yale, Virginia had suffered intermittently from vague symptoms such as rheumatism and fatigue. Her health deteriorated at Yale, and in March 1937, she was admitted to New Haven Hospital after the onset of diarrhea, anorexia, fatigue, and shoulder pain. Her symptoms abruptly subsided, and she was discharged after 3 days. 4 months later, she was admitted with similar symptoms to the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, and she was diagnosed with lupus. The disease, with its characteristic periods of remission and relapse, would constantly plague Alexander for the rest of her life. Alexander's medical connections enabled her to receive cutting-edge therapy by pioneering physicians in treating the disease. But their armamentarium against the disease that had a 90% mortality rate 5 years after diagnosis was limited. The treatment included blood transfusions, testosterone, bed rests, bismuth, and gold. Alexander was hospitalized several times because of the disease. During a 14-month period between 1937 and 1938, she was admitted 3 times. Ultimately, Alexander's disease precipitated a personal decision. In 1937, she moved to Washington, D.C., and began what she called a voluntary exile from her beloved Philadelphia, an exile that lasted 8 years. She did not feel she had the stamina to maintain a private practice, and did not want her family to see her, as she put it, so dull and incapable because of the disease. She took a position at Howard University, where she worked with Dr. Paul Corneli, another physician activist and public health researcher who, in 1934, became the first African American to receive a public health degree. In 1939, the two co-authored an article that analyzed the wide gap in the health status between Black and white Americans. Their proposed solutions included the desegregation of health facilities, the creation of public health activities targeted to the Black community, and the passage of the 1939 National Health Bill, which included a plan for national health insurance. Also in 1939, Virginia started working for the National Youth Administration, a government agency that assisted unemployed youth. And in 1941, after writing her thesis on the health status of African American National Youth Administration workers, she finally received her degree from Yale. It was not the doctoral degree that she wanted, but a master's degree. Nonetheless, she became the first Black woman to receive a degree from Yale School of Medicine. With her degree in hand, she went to Alabama and worked as a civilian officer in the United States Public Health Service at a clinic in Birmingham, Alabama. Virginia Alexander's activism, public health training, and research placed her at the vanguard of Black public health professionals. For example, in January 1938, the Children's Bureau invited her to be a delegate to a conference on improving the health of mothers and children, particularly Black Americans, but she was not allowed to speak. One attendee criticized the Bureau's action, contending if Alexander had been allowed to discuss her research, she would have given some extraordinary insights on infant and maternal mortality so far as colored people are concerned. Virginia Alexander returned to Philadelphia in 1945, but because of resurgent poor health, she was only able to resume a limited practice. She once again became a member of the Race Relations Committee of Philadelphia. Although she remained a committed Quaker, towards the end of her life, she began to express impatience about the continuing plight of African Americans and doubts about Quaker methods to advance racial equality. The last years of Virginia Alexander's life were dominated by her battle with lupus. She died from the disease at age 50 on July 24th, 1949. Although she had lived with lupus for over 13 years, she tried not to let it interfere with her work. Indeed, there were times when she woefully neglected her health. Her sister-in-law urged her to take care of herself because the social problems that confront you and me cannot be solved in our generation. However, Virginia continued working, and 2 months after writing a letter from Rochester, Minnesota, where she had been taken care of at the Mayo Clinic, she was critically ill, suffering from pneumonia, sepsis, and severe anemia. During a 14-day hospitalization, her family feared that she would die, especially because, as one of her physicians told them, no one knew the cause of the disease, and therefore they did not know how to attack it. In the decades after Alexander's death, most notably within the past 30 years, there has been a burgeoning interest in the United States in eliminating racial and ethnic inequalities in health and healthcare. At the same time, there have been growing discussions about the public roles and professional obligations of physicians and other health professionals in tackling social ills. The biography of Virginia Alexander sheds historical light on both issues. Her story reminds us that efforts to address these stubborn inequities have had a long history, and her career provides insights into the substance and character of past efforts to eliminate racial health inequities. Virginia Alexander saw her medical practice as inextricably linked to broader social and political concerns and crafted her career accordingly. She understood that the improvement of the health of African Americans could not be limited to the medical profession. It would take a broad-based effort that would involve not only medicine, but civic and religious organizations, political activism, research, and public health. Until her death, Virginia Alexander remained a champion for justice in healthcare. 6 weeks before her final hospitalization, she attended her last Race Relations Committee meeting. Almost 20 years after she had first brought the issue before the committee, the agenda included a discussion about strategies to combat hospital discrimination, a fitting tribute to her influence. On March 27, 1940, 9 years before her death, the Pennsylvania Institute of Negro Health honored Virginia Alexander in a ceremony in her native Philadelphia. The Institute recognized her work in operating her small hospital and in heading the investigation of the social, economic, and health problems of the Black residents of North Philadelphia. And its coverage of the event, her hometown newspaper, the Philadelphia Inquirer, praised Dr. Alexander as one of the country's most foremost Black physicians and noted that Black medical leaders in Philadelphia considered her their foremost worker in public health. Indeed, the award bestowed on Virginia Alexander was in recognition of outstanding services to Negro health. What a fitting tribute for Virginia Alexander, a passionate advocate for health equity long before it reached prominence as a national public health issue in the United States. Thank you very much.